Mary, I want to ask you about you're forecasting another strong year despite a lot of uncertainty that's out there in the market right now.
And as we look to 25, there's a lot of fundamentals in our business that we think are going to allow us to have a strong year. Yes, there's a lot of uncertainty with some of the issues related to regulation and tariff.
On April 11th, 2025, General Motors stunned industry watchers by announcing a temporary shutdown of its CAMI Assembly plant in Ontario, an abrupt move affecting nearly 500 workers next month. Today, we unpack how GM's multi-layered response to looming 25% U.S. tariffs on Canadian and Mexican auto imports could reshape the global auto and EV landscape. Since 1989, the CAMI Assembly plant in Ingersoll, Ontario, has been a cornerstone of GM's cross-border manufacturing. In 2024, GM pivoted CAMI to build bright drop electric vans, hoping to hit an ambitious annual target of 50,000 units by 2025. However, weak demand left GM with roughly 2,000 unsold bright drop vans in the first 2 years, forcing a rapid production recalibration and integration of the cargo van line into Chevrolet's broader lineup. Under the North American Trade Agreement of 1994, GM expanded aggressively across Canada and Mexico. These facilities now churn out over 700,000 vehicles annually, gas and electric. In 2024, GM's Mexican operations alone delivered about 100,000 EVs, accounting for roughly 60% of Mexico's total electric vehicle output. Yet, as of July 1, 2025, President Trump's proposed 25% tariffs on auto parts and vehicles imported from Canada and Mexico threaten to upend this finely tuned cross-border ecosystem. 1 in 4 GM vehicles sold in the U.S. is built in Canada or Mexico, far higher exposure than EV-focused competitors like Tesla and Rivian, which rely on predominantly domestic production and limited Mexican component sourcing. Against this backdrop, GM insists its looming CAMI shutdown is purely a production adjustment, not a tariff casualty, but with sustained duties estimated by Barclays analysts to tack on at least $3,000 per vehicle built south of the border against single-digit operating margins, GM's dual-track contingency playbook is about to be stress-tested like never before. At a macro level, these tensions risk undermining broader U.S. industrial strategy. The tariffs aim to protect domestic jobs, but by disrupting integrated supply chains, they may inadvertently shift investment to non-North American markets or accelerate automation. GM itself has hinted that automation and digital planning tools are part of its contingency playbook, measures that could offset labor needs but stoke political backlash over job displacement. Critically, policy uncertainty on emission standards compounds the challenge. GM has tethered its EV pivot to clear, predictable CO2 reduction targets. Without federal clarity, any capital infusion, even the proposed $60 billion, could stall, leaving both automaker and policy goals unfulfilled. In this light, GM's engagement with the White House isn't just about tariff relief. It's a broader plea for a stable regulatory environment to justify massive investments. At the Wolfe Research Investment Conference earlier this year, CEO Mary Barra revealed the first layer of GM's tariff defense, a near-term contingency plan capable of absorbing 30 to 50% of additional duty-related costs without tapping fresh capital. This cost cushion hinges on renegotiated fixed-price contracts for steel and aluminum across North America, offering immediate shelter against volatile metal tariffs. But as Ford's Jim Farley starkly put it, the prospect of 25% duties spells chaos, warning of a gaping hole in critical steel and aluminum availability for the broader U.S. auto sector. Farley's dire assessment underscores the stakes. If metal suppliers redirect output or hike prices under tariff pressure, both GM and its peers could face significant production bottlenecks. Meanwhile, GM CFO Paul Jacobson has laid out the second, and more structural, layer of defense, a long-term realignment of its manufacturing footprint. This involves reallocating parts production to tariff-protected locations and, if pushed, relocating full assembly operations back to U.S. soil. In practical terms, that could mean migrating certain stamping, body, and paint shops into the American heartland, complementing GM's existing domestic plants. Behind closed doors, Barra has personally lobbied the White House. In an initial phone call, GM secured a temporary exemption from the 25% duties, buying breathing room for automakers. At a follow-up meeting with President Trump and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, Barra pitched a sweeping $60 billion investment plan in U.S. manufacturing, aimed at creating jobs and upgrading capacity. However, GM spokespeople stress that policy certainty on both tariffs and emission standards remains the linchpin for any major capital deployment. Peeling back another layer, GM is also weighing the painful economics of reshoring. Though the automaker has pledged $59 billion to bolster domestic capacity, that cash is already earmarked to fuel its aggressive electrification roadmap, phasing out internal combustion engines entirely. With only single-digit margins on every vehicle sold, analysts warn that a $3,000 per unit cost spike could render many U.S. assembly lines unprofitable, forcing GM either to slash costs further or raise sticker prices in ways that risk alienating price-sensitive consumers. Finally, GM's dual-track approach marries these short and long-term maneuvers. Immediate cost defects, like fixed-price metal contracts and a contingency war chest, are meant to blunt the initial tariff shock. Simultaneously, structural shifts in production footprint and part sourcing will determine GM's resilience if duties persist beyond the coming months. The real question: can GM deftly switch between these strategy modes as the political winds shift? The CAMI shutdown has ignited alarm. Unifor local leadership in Ontario decried the announcement as devastating for families, while Ingersoll's mayor reminded residents that CAMI has weathered downturns, from the 2009 two-week strike to the 2008 financial crisis, thanks to its skilled labor pool and stable trade ties. Yet the impending three-week closure starting mid-May, followed by a half-capacity reopening and then a dormancy stretching until October, is uncharted territory for the plant. When operations resume post-October, GM plans to run a single shift at CAMI, working through its stockpile of Bright Drop vans. That gentle restart underscores the deeper demand challenge facing Bright Drop. Only 2,000 units sold in 2 years against a 5,000 unit goal. The plant's idled months could reinforce doubts about EV uptake among fleet customers, even as Chevrolet integrates Bright Drop under its broader commercial vehicle umbrella. On the U.S. manufacturing front, a reshoring push could boost plant utilization in Michigan, Ohio, and Texas. But analysts caution that domestic supply chains, particularly for battery cells, semiconductors, and advanced plastics, aren't yet robust enough to absorb a sudden surge in production. Tesla and Rivian, with their near-complete Made in America supply webs, may thus gain a relative edge if GM's transition proves bumpy. Internationally, Canada and Mexico could see reduced export volumes, denting regional economic output and potentially inviting retaliatory measures. If Canadian and Mexican-built GM cars become $3,000 pricier at the U.S. border, GM's North American sales mix could tilt back towards stateside-built models, but at the expense of cross-border investment fluidity that has underpinned the industry for decades. As July 1, 2025, the day the 25% Canada-Mexico tariffs fully take effect, looms, GM's dual-track strategy will face its ultimate test. The CAMI plant's resilience, forged through strikes and market slumps, offers hope that GM can adapt. Yet, the company's ability to absorb initial tariff pains, reshuffle its manufacturing footprint, and secure policy certainty will determine whether it emerges stronger or stumbles under renewed protectionism. You've seen how GM's contingency playbook, fixed-price metal contracts, and long-term reshoring plans intertwine in a high-stakes gamble. Now, we want to hear from you. How do you think these tariffs will reshape GM's global strategy and the auto industry at large? Drop your insights in the comments, hit like if you found this breakdown useful, and subscribe for more data-driven deep dives into the auto sector's most critical developments.